Christian Parenting. I'm Julie Lyles-Carr. You're listening to the All Mom Does podcast, part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Today on the All Mom Does podcast, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects ever, but it's become a subject that's a favorite of mine only in, say, the last 15, 20 years. So you're going to understand more in here just a little bit. I want to introduce you to Tina Huggins. She is an author along with entrepreneur and all kinds of different things in her CV. Tina, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. It's fun. It's great to catch up and share about how we all love or not love to nap.
To nap. That is the topic that we're going to be digging into. And again, I've had a lifelong, if myself and a nap appeared on a Facebook status report, it would say, it's complicated. I had a complicated relationship with naps for a long time. But before we dive into that, tell my listeners where you live, what you do, the family, all that.
Well, I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm about the seventh generation in my family of Cummings, and I started out as a mother and a teacher. I taught first grade, and then I became kind of the breadwinner of the family, and I was hired by Apple to be one of their first 16 staff development trainers. So I've traveled all over the United States teaching teachers how to use technology in the classroom. Then I have become a grandmother. I remarried about 6 years ago and have a wonderful life with my husband and two bonus daughters. And I have two of my three children in Nashville and one is in California.
So you really were in some of the beginning stages, what we've now seen come into full fruition, which is this desperate need now for technology in the classroom because of the season that we've been in and kids being both remote and then partially back in the classroom and all the different things. When you started in that lane of beginning to help inculcate technology into the classroom, was that received with open arms or was that something that people were a little nervous about? What did you find?
Well, it depended on which state you were in. So some states were very progressive and moving from PC to Apple, and so it would be received really well. A lot of teachers were so excited and just wanted to learn. There were other cities that I went into, one I remember in particular that was a PC moving to Mac, and if they could have shot darts at me for the first half day. I mean, it was just like, whoa,
yeah,
look out. So once I could get them through the nuance of what they could do with their students that was different from a PC, then they began to be much more engaged and excited about it. But don't you think that's the way we are with anything we have to learn that's new? It's kind of like you and I talking about Skype. I used it years ago and then coming back and, okay, now how is this working a little bit different from what it used to be? So, life is full of changes and sometimes we go kicking and screaming and other times people embrace it and really learn about it.
Right. And certainly over the last many months, it's something that we're taking an even closer look at, just the ways that technology can both keep us connected and able to keep working and overcome a lot of hurdles. And at the same time, how it's not a substitute for some of the things that we value most. So it's just fascinating to hear from someone who's been in those early genesis stages of moving technology into the classroom. So interesting. Now, Tina, I got to confess up front, I already mentioned that my relationship with naps and such an important topic for no matter what stage of parenting you're in, because let's face it, we have the naps that we feel like we're supposed to make sure those babies are getting, and some of them with less grace about it than others. And then all the way up to those moms who are listening who have teenagers who all they seem to be doing is napping and wondering if that's okay and what that means, to the mom who just desperately needs a nap and doesn't see one on the horizon. So I want to hear about what got you fascinated in the topic of napping. I mean, what was it for you that you went, that's something I want to do a deep dive into?
Well, personally, I'm like you. I don't nap. I am always on the go. I have a ton of things that I want to accomplish, and I was that way when I had my children. My children were 20 months apart. So you can
Oh, yeah.
imagine the ages of nobody, somebody would want a nap, nobody would want a nap. And it was really, really challenging for me. And I one day recall that my mother had done this with us. And when we did not want to nap, I had three siblings, and she told us about the nap fairy. And the nap fairy would come and leave a treat outside our door if we took a nap. And it worked like a charm. And I just, all of a sudden, I happened to recall that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder if it still works. And so I was selling Tupperware at the time, one of my many different jobs. And I got the little orange Tupperware cups, and they had lids on them so that if we had, at one point, we had a dog and they couldn't touch them. And I began to tell them that if you take a nap, you will have a treat when you wake up. And it actually worked really well because, I mean, who doesn't want a treat?
Right, right.
And I'm kind of one of those sweet treat people because I love sweets. And so back then in the day, we really didn't have a lot of the healthy snacks and things that kids have today. So mine would be like a few M&Ms, little marshmallows, some Cheerios. They all will love Cheerios. And that was just like a little slice of heaven for them. And I would get to have some time to clean the house, or, I didn't usually take a nap, but I would have my to-do list that I would keep working on.
Right, right. Napping is so fascinating to me because I do think there's something of a nap personality that begins to emerge. My mom always talked about that I was one of these babies that never wanted to nap. I mean, I can remember as a little kid different scenarios in which my friends would, we'd be at some event or something, and there would be a designated nap time, and it was just torture to me. I had stuff to do. I had books to read. I had things that I wanted to play. I mean, just this whole concept of having to stop everything, stop all the activity, and go comatose for a little while just sounded terrible. Whereas my brother, who's just about a little under 2 years younger than I am, Tina, he was a world-class napper. Mm-hmm. I mean, he would just kind of beg, is it time? Is it time? Is it time to go take a nap? It's just, and here we were, these two kids, very close in age, like your children, being raised kind of in the same rhythm and the same routines of a home with completely different approaches and preferences about this nap thing. Why do you think that kids are like that? I mean, and as moms, do we need to say, well, everybody's going to have a nap time? I mean, how do we manage that in the home when we see these different personality styles?
Well, I think I have three children absolutely different. One is kind of obstinate and wants to do it his way.
What are you saying, Tina? What are you saying about me? Is that a little...
Well, that's okay. I mean, I'm obstinate in my own way. But, my daughter was clingy. Every child is different, but I think structure is important. And I think we all know that in a family, sometimes it's fighting the battle that we give up. And the research really shows that children, especially toddlers, need to have naps. That a lot of time temper tantrums increase in the end of the day because they're weary. And it might not be that they sleep 2 hours, but if you get a 45-minute to an hour nap in, it's great for them, and it's great for you as a mother to just have some time to breathe and have quiet and not have somebody hanging on a leg and somebody pulling on your hair. And it makes a big difference. So I think that structure is a really great thing for parents to follow. It's just like when I was a teacher, we had structure in the classroom. I had first graders. And so I think that a lot of times we give up before we should. And I think that the Nodders book is a great way to help win that battle. That's the reason I wanted to write this book for 20 years and never really had time, and got stuck in COVID. And my friend, who I lived next door to about 5 years ago, she called and said, have you written the book yet? And I said, no, but I will. And I hung up that phone and I thought, okay, let's see if you can do this. So my grandson was not a good napper. He was great as a baby, and then bigger he wouldn't. And so my daughter and I He spends a great deal of time with me because she works a good bit. She's a full-time work and mom. And so we would trade off on certain days and I would keep him. And we got him into a rhythm of napping. Now, when this child was 5, he would say, "Lovey, could I place my order to the nap fairy?" And I'd say, "Well, she's awfully busy, but let's maybe just give 2 ideas of what you might like."
I like I like this drive-through kind of nap order. I like it.
But it works. Even it doesn't have to be something sweet. I think parents can be creative with what they want to do. I've done notes before. Colton really likes the treats and things, but parents could do healthy treats. They can do, we're going to take a trip to the zoo, we're going to go to the park as something. So I think it gives a lot of flexibility to how parents want to raise their children and what they want to do as a reward for taking a nap. And if the child likes it, they look forward to seeing what's going to be outside that door when they get up.
Right. Talk to me about the research that you encountered, because you talked about that research shows that toddlers really need that nap time. I think a lot of parents, particularly when you have some age range with kids, so let's say that you've got the baby who's going down pretty consistently, and then you've got the toddler that you're negotiating with, but then you've got the 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old. I mean, at what point, I know some of that's predicated if you have children in a traditional school setting. Of course, for a lot of people in the last year, that's sort of disappeared. So they're having to manage more kids at home during those times that might be more traditional nap times. But what did you find in the research about children and when they age out of naps, or should they age out of naps? I mean, I know that there are different people. Michael Hyatt is one of them, who is a very renowned writer in the leadership space, was the head of Thomas Nelson for a while. I believe he's one of the ones who talks about in the afternoon, he takes about 30 minutes to close his eyes and just take a kind of a light dozing kind of a nap. What did you find as you began to dig into that?
Well, I think that we have to remember every child is different. And so you have different personalities, like with all of your children. And so some children will nap better than others. When the children are in their toddler age is where the research really shows that the napping is important. Now, what I did with my children, especially in the summertime, as my boys were aging out and in kindergarten and first grade in the summertime, I would say, now, you are getting bigger, but Olivia has to have her nap. So the nap fairy will still bring something if you are quiet in your bed and you're reading your books. So now we're encouraging our older children to take some time to read, but to rest and just to be quiet, because it's something that everybody in the family can learn to do. Right. I didn't learn that very well like you, but for me, it was important for me to just have some time just for quiet.
Right. And that's one thing that we definitely transitioned to and used with several of our kids who really didn't seem to require as much sleep. I mean, that is the reality. There are children who simply do not require as much sleep. And to try to hold them to the same standard as a child who needs that level of sleep, you can't. It just becomes a frustrating thing. So for us, it did become this quiet time. And as long as they were willing to remain quiet, they could do whatever in their room, but we were going to have this break. One thing I found too for myself, Tina, and when I've said my relationship with this topic has been complicated because it's been complicated with my kids, but it's also been complicated in myself. My husband and I both were what I would refer to as gerbils. Like we just went. We were in industries that required us to be awake and on at any time of the day. And then we went into parenthood, and that requires the same thing of you as well. What's interesting to me is I began to really relish having a nap every now and then as an adult, and nap during the times when I could get some of the kids down to be quiet and contained in their pack and plays. But I sometimes found too that I needed a nap not because I was sleepy tired, but because I was a little overwhelmed. Do you find that sometimes that's the reason for a nap? Not really that you're sleepy, but there's just been a lot going on. There's been a lot of input. There's been a lot of stimulus, and it gives the brain a break?
Absolutely. And I'm trying to listen to that more than what I used to. Matthew 11:28 tells us that for those that are weary to come and have some rest. And I do think you and I probably have similar personalities where there's so much on my plate that I want to be sure I get it done. But there are some days that I literally will just go up and stretch out for a little bit. My husband comes to be sure I'm okay because I don't do it very often. But I do think everybody has a different rhythm. And I do think that those of us that are very, very active can get so much going on that we don't have a moment of just breath and reflection, or a time for me to just sit back and just pray about what's overwhelming me. Writing the book was simple.
Right.
Selling the book is something else.
A different thing. Yeah, exactly.
And so I think that everybody in our life, and whether when we're working or if we are at home with our children and raising them, there's so many elements to consider that I think it can be overwhelming. And resting is a great activity for everybody if it's just reading a book or being quiet and then letting those that want to sleep actually just saw those logs.
Right, right. How do you think that the role of ritual plays in this way? So we've talked about this incentive for kids who are willing to rest, and that can be a treat at the end of the rest time, all of those things. But it seems to me that sometimes if we don't get into a particular rhythm and certain steps along the way to be cueing our kids that we're heading up to nap time, that we can almost create this really what feels to them like harsh left turn where they're engaged in an activity, they're having fun, they're doing their thing, and then all of a sudden it's not the nap fairy, it's the nap meanie who shows up and says, you got to stop this thing you're doing that's fun and you've got to come over here and be still. What are some of the things that we need to think about in cueing our kids ahead of time to make that entree into nap time a lot smoother and not quite so pugilistic as it can get sometimes?
Exactly. So that comes into play with having routines. And, when you're a new mother, you have a routine. You kind of know the sequence of feeding, napping, resting, feeding, napping, resting.
Laundry, so feeding, napping, resting, laundry.
Yes, it just doesn't stop. But I think that if we look at a routine with especially I really think about toddlers a lot with this, because this is where the book really is designed to get them to want to rest and take a nap. But we usually, with your toddlers, we have a playtime in the morning, and then we begin to have our lunchtime. And then we talk about, okay, now we're going to have a story time before we take our nap. So if you begin early with that routine, then and some days you can't do that. It doesn't work every day.
Right.
You may be out trying to get home, and all of a sudden I would look in my car seat, and at the car seats in the back, I had 3 of them, and 2 of the 3 would be sound asleep.
Yeah.
Well, I was not going to take them out of that car. I just kept driving.
Exactly.
So I do think, but I think when you're at home, as many days as you can, to have that routine and keep saying it. Oh, today it's time we're going to have playtime, and then we're going to have our lunch, then we're going to have a story time, and then we're going to nap. And then we'll get up and do something fun this afternoon. So it's that routine of hearing it and being as consistent when you are at home to be able to do that. And if they only nap 30 minutes, that's a 30-minute nap. They still were quiet and they went to sleep, and you had a little breath that you could take. But we all know structure is important within our family unit. It really allows the family to be, I think, calmer than when everything is very chaotic. And some days you have chaos, and that's just the way it is. You have to not worry about it.
Right. I'm glad that you brought up, because it seems to me this is simplifying too much, and I apologize ahead of time, but kind of 2 categories of moms who are really loosey-goosey, go with the flow, and if the kids get a nap in, fine, or wherever they drop, that's fine. But then also the moms who almost become enslaved to the routine in a way that begins to really interfere with their interpersonal relationships, with a sense of scheduling. I've seen those moms more often than not begin to feel very alone, very isolated. And it's all because they're trying so hard to put together a great routine. Where's the tipping point where we might say to ourselves, okay, maybe I'm letting the routine or my value on naps get a little too far ahead of some things that I probably also need emotionally and psychologically to be a healthy mom.
Oh, that's a great point. I think that can work in so many areas, even outside of napping. I do think that for little ones, a routine is helpful. I don't think it's realistic to think that you can have that routine every single day. I think weekends are always different. You know, you're outside doing a lot of things, but it's trying to find a balance because the structure is good for the children. The research shows that napping is really good for toddlers, and as you get bigger, then you know it's going to go away. But I think it is something that will also be helpful for parents or caregivers, especially now with COVID. You have two parents working at home. It's really hard to just have a moment of quiet where you can think. And so sometimes I think we have to look at where's the balance of, is this a really important time? In the summertime, I'm going to lax up a little bit because we've got lots of stuff going on. And I think every parent has to look at what their life is like, because what my life was like might be totally different from what one of my best friends' life was. So I think that everybody has to make those individual decisions. But I do know just from my three children and my grandson that napping has been a benefit for all of them when they did it when they were little.
Right. Do you think that the emphasis we put on nighttime routines also helps inform the acceptance level to which our kids might have for daytime napping? Is that do you think there's a correlation there?
Well, a routine is repetitive, and so at night you do the similar thing. You have dinner, we brush our teeth, we get our jammies on, we have a story time or a Bible lesson, and then we go to bed. And you look at what the room setting is. I try to have the room be low lights or no lights, that the blinds are pulled. And Colton always loved music. When he's over at my house, he wants to have music in the background. Every child is different, but I think if we make it a calming experience, then they're more likely to sit down and relax a little bit better. There's always going to be the outlier that just doesn't want to do it.
Right. There's always that one kid, and every family usually has one. But
Yeah.
Well, Tina, talk to me about this place where you've had all these iterations of career and that this became a passion project for you. You know, there are a lot of people who I think when life got interrupted for them at the beginning of the pandemic, they've really struggled and grappled with trying to sort of understand their next. I think for a lot of us, we were all just like, well, as soon as things get back to normal, And now we know that normal is long gone. We passed that station a while back and things are going to be really different now. How did you make that pivot? And I know that when I say the word pivot, there are going to be some people who just want to punch me in the throat because we've heard that word so many times, just like living in unprecedented times and learn how to pivot and all those things. But that place, because it's a great lesson, regardless if it's something of this nature that we've just all been through or are going through, or even moving forward, even if it's just something that comes into an individual life where a career gets interrupted or mothering's not going exactly the way you thought, or you thought you wanted to be home with the kids and now you're not sure, or you thought you wanted to stay with the job, but now you're really conflicted. And how do we find that energy in that place to find creative outlets that allow us to continue to grow, to expand, to think outside of the box when we find ourselves in times in which a lot of the plans and routines and rituals that we've been depending on aren't working? How did that go for you?
Oh my goodness, what a story. I went to a private girls' school, was told that I wasn't college material, wanted to go to college, and finally was accepted into Birmingham Southern, where I went into education because I love children. And I knew that if I stayed in first grade, I could count and read at that level and I would be fine. But later in my life, I became the breadwinner of my family. I thought I would get married and be an at-home mom. I had no expectation of anything else. And God just turned the fruit basket upside down, and my life has been so totally different from what I ever expected. I think He steps in at the right time and just guides you. So my work at Apple was, I had been in a classroom at my children's private school, and then that led me to Apple, and then I had a cookie business. And, things happened in my life where challenges came up, and for some reason, I have a very creative mind, and I would figure out a way to solve a problem. And that might be creating a piece of furniture, or it might be having a cookie business. But then challenges come with everything we do.
Right.
So the cookie business, I got arthritis and I couldn't make the cookies, and I had to close that out. And so then you go back and you think, what am I going to do now? So I've had a lot of really fascinating things that God has opened up and allowed me to see that I really was quite smart. I think my favorite God story to tell is that I was working with a VP of a company, and my president said, "You have got to get your master's." And I said, "That'll never happen." She said, "Go talk to that man over there from Pepperdine." And I was so embarrassed. And I said, "I have to take the GRE or the Millers." And he said, "Yes, you do." And I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Don't you like the program?" And I said, "It was an educational technology master's." I said, "I love it, but I won't get those tests. I'm dyslexic and I've never tested well." And he said, "Hang on just a minute." He walked away and he came back and he said, "I'm the dean. Here's your application. Here's where you're going to mail it. You're not going to take a test." I went to graduate school and graduated at 50 years of age with a 3.9.
Wow.
So it took me that long to learn that I was actually really capable of doing things. So I've always been creative and done different things. And this book has been in my mind, but writing a book is something you just can't sit down and do if you're having to be the breadwinner of the family, at least for me. And I never have considered myself a great writer. So I decided that I would do it because I was sitting at home and I was really frustrated not being able to get out and do the things that I usually do. And so God birthed that book in me that I wouldn't have thought would have been possible, but it's been a great experience. I think we have to learn in our life that sometimes I think we know what our life is going to be. And I think that God really challenges us and then pushes us and builds us and molds us like that clay,
right,
by showing us that we can do lots of different things if we just kind of open up and listen and are guided. Right. And so I think that's the beauty about living. And I've lived a lot of different things, but this one has been really fun to actually create and see that it was something that I have wanted to do that has actually happened.
Right. Tina, I think that is such an encouragement to women. And I can remember in those stages as a young mom, there were so many things on my heart that I wanted to get to do. And for some reason, I had embraced the idea that I think our society promotes to a certain point, that if I hadn't accomplished XYZ by the age of 30 or by the age of 35, and I was seeing women around me at the age of 30 and 35 accomplishing some of these things and thinking, what's wrong with me? I'm a slacker. And yet I wanted to have more focus on my kids at the time. I was trying to help my husband in launching his business. I bought into the idea that if I didn't have it accomplished by a certain point, then it could never happen. And so I'm so encouraged to hear you talk about going back in for that advanced degree, not only with the idea of, can I even do this just from a faculty's position, but can I do this at this age? And I'm hoping that what moms are hearing out there, and some of it can happen even in those slivers of nap time with your toddlers we've been talking about, but to not feel like that you have to take nap time and that has to be the moment at which you earn the advanced degree or start the new business. You may really just need rest during that time. So the encouragement that it doesn't all have to be done by the time you're 35. Do you find that to be playing out in your life as well?
Oh my goodness, yes. Wow. I would say that probably I have accomplished more in the last 20 years. Being a mother was very important, and I was so glad that I was at home. I thought I would always be, but I think opportunities arise when they're supposed to. And I think we have to be bold enough to say, okay, I'm going to jump on this. And I had a failed company with the cookie business, and that was really hard. But I think I also learned a lot of things that I've done differently now. So life is about learning and failing and picking yourself up and trying again. And I couldn't do it without my faith. I'll tell you that.
Right.
I would never be where I am without my faith and my relationship with God.
So beautiful. Tina Huggins, what a delight to talk with you. The book is called The Nodders. What? You don't want to nap? And I don't want to spoil it for listeners, but I want them to go get this book because the book cover, the jacket, actually turns into a little something. It's so fun what you've put together, a nap pouch. People have got to go check that out. Tina Huggins, so great to talk with you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here today.
Oh, thank you. It's been great.
I might even take a nap this afternoon in your honor.
Good. There we go.
You'll find more from this episode on the show notes. Be sure and check them out at allmomdoes.com. And wanted to ask you a big favor. Be sure and go to wherever you are listening to this podcast and give us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps us get the word out about the podcast. Can't wait to see you next time on the All Mom Does podcast.